On this video, I want to discuss the 120th Psalm. It's the first of so-called Shir Hamaalot, and a lot of people in the situation today after the terrorist attack on October 7th, a lot of people in various synagogues read all the Shir Hamaalot, the 15 Psalms. There are other, of course, collections of Psalms that people read at the time of danger, at the time we need special protection. But Shir Hamaalot is one of the methods that I noticed in certain synagogues. They just read all Shir Hamaalot. And the very first one, I think, describes our situation very well and specifically applicable to what is happening. And that is, we know, of course, the danger of people who actually come and kill us. But to a lesser extent, people realize the danger of those who incite to kill. Do you know that out of 10 Nazi criminals that were hanged after the World War II, after Nuremberg Trials, not all Nazi criminals were given death sentence, but 10 of them were. By the way, the hint is usually found, and Rabbi Weissman noticed this idea that the 10 sons of Haman have in their names 3 letters written in small. And those letters spell exactly the year when the 10 Nazi criminals were hanged. So in a way, it's hinted that when Esther was praying that the 10 sons of Haman will be killed, here the 10 spiritual sons of Hitler were also hanged. It wasn't just killed, but they were also hanged, which is not the usual way of punishment. They actually made an appeal that they wanted to be rather shot as regular criminals. But they were hanged, kind of special way of showing that they were not just criminals, they were criminals against humanity. Anyway, so one of those criminals, he didn't actually kill anybody. His name was Julius Streicher, and he was a chief editor of propaganda of certain press. There was a certain journal or newspaper that he constantly made Jews look like they're some kind of worms, some kind of cockroaches that should be destroyed. He incited people to kill, to hate and kill the Jews. So even though he didn't kill anybody, but the incitement was enough for the Allies to consider him a war criminal. Because of his words, there's blood on his hands too. So today, most of the mainstream so-called press and various TV and internet channels are full of hatred and unfairness towards Israel. And that's what we'll see in this psalm. That's what the psalmist is praying against. Save me from Lashon Ramiyah. This is the tongue, the big tongue that destroys everything. They're really inciting. They don't want to show the truth, or they show the ways with half-truths, with showing partial truths, and they completely rely on Hamas propaganda, which was shown plenty of times that it was totally lies. For example, with this famous story of hospital that supposedly Israelis bombed. As it turned out, it was a bomb that came from Islamic Jihad, and the number of those who killed was also exaggerated by Hamas. And this is happening all the time, and it's very hard often to prove it, because not every time. It was lucky that Israel had a lot of ample proof in this particular case. They had conversations that they were able to catch between Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They had various photos, all kinds of proofs, but a lot of times there's no full proof, especially for one person. When they will show a picture of a child who was killed, we don't know, was it Israel, was it not Israel. Even if it was Israel, again, in any war there are people killed. Israel is sending millions, literally, it's not an exaggeration, they have the numbers, millions of messages, papers for the civilians to flee, WhatsApp messages, phone calls. A lot of times the Hamas itself doesn't let them flee. There are proofs now, full proofs, that there are cases when they shoot at their own people so that they cannot flee. It's Israelis now that were able to put the tanks there so that the Hamas does not stop its own citizens from fleeing. And they're trying to get them into the southern part of Gaza. But with all that, when it's war, there are always going to be people dying. And usually it's the majority of people who are dying are civilians. That was true about every single war that was fought, whether it's against ISIS, whether it's against the Nazis. Every war causes a lot of civilian tragedy. There's just simply no way out of this. And Israel is doing much more than NATO alliance or any other army in order to minimize the civilian casualties, but it's unavoidable. So when the press is constantly showing over and over what Hamas propaganda is feeding it, even with this hospital story, they immediately picked it up. BBC, New York Times, they all picked it up. And when it was proven that it was false, they didn't clearly change that it's Hamas, the fault is Hamas. Now it's really obscure in the title. Most people don't even read the articles, they read the titles. So in the title, it's not even clear at all who actually did. Okay, so there was something that happened and people got killed. So most readers will probably still assume it's Israel. At the very least, it's not obvious that the fault lies fully with Hamas. The truth is, every single casualty and every single child that's killed in Gaza, the fault is fully lying with Hamas, just like every single German that was killed in World War II. The fault lies fully with the Nazis, fully with Hitler and his cohorts, not with the Allies who were forced, in order to stop Hitler, they were forced to bomb. By the way, in the case of Allies, they weren't always justified. There were some bombings that could have been avoided. There was no particular need to bomb certain places, like Dresden, just in order to win the war. But in the case of Israeli army, they don't just bomb. Gaza is so densely populated that if Israel would be bombing indiscriminately, then the number of casualties would be in hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And if they wanted to bomb civilians, then they would simply bomb everybody, and it doesn't even take long. Israel does have the weapons to bomb from the top. In fact, it's a lot easier. Nobody would then get killed. None of the soldiers would get killed. You just bomb from the top. Now, of course, right now there are hostages, but before that, there were other wars when there were no hostages. And there was a possibility to simply destroy the entire Gaza, which was not done. The whole point is that Israel is trying to minimize civilian casualties, and that's why there are comparatively so few, given that Hamas does the opposite. They want to maximize civilian casualties. But my problem is not with Hamas. I understand who Hamas is. Hamas is a real enemy. Like the Vilna Gaon used to describe it, there are two types of bad. Clear bad, that's openly evil, and mirma, a kind of lying, when it pretends to be on your side, sort of, and really is lying all the time. And that's what the media particularly is doing. The mirma is in a way more dangerous because they don't claim they're against Israel. They say, well, Israel does have a right to protect itself, but it has no right to kill the civilians. And here is all these pictures with civilians getting killed. So hence the proof. Yeah, and Hamas propaganda claims that there is already 10,000 of them getting killed. By the way, Hamas does not distinguish between civilians and Hamas fighters. So we don't even know from Hamas's own words what percentage of them were civilians. But let's say, right, the whole number. How do we know this is correct number? Israel doesn't claim anything at this point. They're trying to figure it out, but it's going to take a while to know exactly how many people actually got killed and how many of them were civilian. And most probably they won't have the exact number anyway. But we know that when the Allies took Mosul against ISIS, the number of civilian casualties was around 10,000. And it was a lot easier. What Israel is doing right now is much more complex. Under Gaza, there's tunnels that are so... The claim is that it's one of the worst places in the world in terms of how hard it is to get Hamas out. There are tunnels with miles and miles going under. All of this, by the way, the billions of dollars that were given for the infrastructure. It could have had Singapore in Gaza. Singapore is also densely populated, but it's extremely successful. Gaza is an excellent place to have hotels near the beach, to have infrastructure. But no, Hamas used pretty much all of the money in order to build underground, whole huge tunnels underground to be able to survive. They understood that one time or another Israel will have to fight back after what they do, the atrocities they do. So Hamas is very well prepared for this, much more than ISIS was in Mosul. So it's incredible how few civilian casualties there are, even according to Hamas's numbers, which are completely exaggerated. At the very least, Hamas is still counting the 500 so-called killed in that hospital, which, like I said, is proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that Israel has nothing to do with it. By the way, a large percentage of rockets that they fire does fall on their civilian areas. And of course, they'll always write it off as casualties, not just casualties, according to their words, it's deliberate killing that Israel is doing. So here is the psalm. I think it's very important to understand. the psalms are written by Ruach HaKodesh, we know that the very first psalm of Shir Hamaalot speaks about this very major topic. Shir Hamaalot el Hashem batzarata li karati v'yaneni. I'm using ArtScroll translation. Shir Hamaalot they usually translate as the Song of Ascents. I'm not going to go into this, what exactly it means, but there's a collection of 15 such songs. To Hashem in my distress, I cried, and he answered me. Hashem, hatzila nafshi misfat sheker. Hashem, rescue my soul from lying lips. Milashon remiyah, from a deceitful tongue. Ma yiten lecha, u'ma yosif lach, lashon remiyah. What else can I give you? What can I add to you, O deceitful tongue? Chitzei gibor shnunim im gachaleri tamim. You're like the sharp arrows of the mighty with coals of ratam wood. Ratam wood is some kind of a wood, apparently it was used, but the idea is that it's coals, meaning it's burning together. It's both the arrow is sharp and it's also burning, meaning the tongue has an ability to hurt at a long distance, as opposed to a sword, let's say. So it's compared to an arrow that flies far and burns and destroys and wounds. Oy ali ki garti meshech shachanti mohalei kedar. Oy to me. It's the same word in many languages. A kind of exclamation. Oy to me. Oy ali. Woe to me for my drawn out sojourn, my exile. I dwelt with here Meshech and Kedar are two different places. Kedar is an Arabic tribe, Ohalei Kedar, they lived in tents. And Meshech, apparently it's a European nation, although there is a dispute about it. Meshech is mentioned in Parshat Noach among the 70 Noachite nations, so-called. It's interesting that apparently ArtScroll translation of Meshech in Hebrew, of course, there is no capital letters, so there's no difference between proper names and regular words. So apparently they understand Meshech to be not a proper name, but just a word of drawn out sojourn, Meshech, Limshoch. But most commentators think that Meshech is a place. So it's Meshech and Kedar, two different places mentioned from north to south. Meshech is somewhere north. Some say it's actually on some territory that's Russia today, possibly. Maybe Meshech was ancestor of Slavs. Rabbi Arya Kaplan brings it as one of the possibilities, but the majority opinion is it's somewhere closer to the land of Israel, possibly in Turkey, but it's further north of Israel. And Kedar is the opposite, the southern exiles. So oy to me that I lived among all these exiles, I was exiled to all these places. Rabat shachnala nafshi im sonei shalom. Long my soul dwelt with those who hate peace. Ani shalom, I am for peace. I am peace, literally. Right? Sometimes the psukim, the verses use a noun as if it's an action, kind of. I'm so much for peace, I am peace. I am fully peace, I just want peace. V'chi adaber, but when I talk, when I speak, Hamala milchama, they all want war. And this is exactly the situation Israel has been for all these years. The vast majority of Israelis wanted peace with Palestinians, even with the dangerous giving up strategic places in the land. Arafat was offered all kinds of very generous offers from, at that time, leftist government of Israel, which means that the majority of Israelis supported this idea. And yet, he started Second Intifada. And then again, Abbas was offered and the Olmert possibility. And again, nothing happened. And all they want is war. They want to destroy Israel. Don't make any mistake about it. The vast majority of, again, there are all kinds of Arabs. Many Arabs are pro-Israel. But the question is, what's the majority? Israel cannot have next to it a state that would, for instance, form alliance with Iran and start attacking it. But the majority, and including Hamas in particular, Hamas doesn't even hide it. They'll either say that the entire land belongs to us. And that's what the demonstrations say all over the place. Demonstrations in London, demonstrations in New York. The demonstrators say that all of Palestine, right, is occupied. The entire, they constantly chant this from the river to the sea, meaning from Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Everything is ours. And how do they imagine it? Let's say there is no state of Israel. That's not the issue even. Not everybody is a Zionist. That's not the issue. Not every Jew is a Zionist. But the question is, how do they think the Jews will survive under Hamas? How would even the Arabs survive under Hamas? In the last attack, the Hamasniks killed a number of Arabs. And they knew it was Arabs. There are testimonies, there are interviews. There's one Arab who survived, for instance, who says how his wife was shot by Hamas even though she was wearing hijab. Then later he saw two other Arabs who were crying that they're Arabs and they were shot by Hamas. If Hamas comes, it's not just the Jews who will suffer. The Jews, they'll kill it immediately. And now how do they imagine? If the majority in Eretz Israel, right, they also claim so-called the right of return, meaning all the people who at some point their ancestors or some of their ancestors lived in Eretz Israel, they'll have a right to go there. So that means many, many millions of Arabs all over the place who have some ancestry from those Arabs who happen to be in the land of Israel some 100 years ago. They'll all be able to go to Eretz Israel. So then demographically, the Jews will be the minority, a small minority. And the number of Arabs who hate them to such an extent that they're willing to kill, you could see interviews of kids, 10, 8, 12 years old, that their main purpose is to kill the Jews. And it's not just in Gaza Strip. So how do you imagine to live in one country with people like that? They'll simply kill off all the Jews. There's no question about it. They don't even hide it. And they will also kill the moderate Arabs. In fact, the majority of those who are killed in terrorist acts done by in the name of Islam, the majority of those who suffer are Muslims themselves. Something like 90-something% they estimate. I don't know if anybody can estimate exactly, but it sounds reasonable that the majority of these terror acts, the mega terror acts, are in Arabic and other Muslim countries against other Muslims, the more moderate ones. Because these people, they don't want peace with anybody. They want a Sharia state, and even the people who basically keep the Muslim law. Like I said, they killed a woman who was wearing hijab, who was supposedly teaching Quran to children, according to what I understand from the interview. I don't know Arabic, but there was a translation, and it seems like the husband is saying that she was very religious, but she belonged to Israel, right? She lives in Israel, okay, so she's the enemy. And even if it would be one country, they would be killing everybody who they consider not religious enough by their standard. So the point is that it's not a fight even of Jews against Muslims or Jews against even Hamas. It's a fight about all the decent people against Nazi criminals, worse than Nazi criminals, who did tremendous atrocities. That's what we're facing. And the Lashon Ramiyah of various TV and newspaper outlets, the lying tongue, deceitful tongue, is what is against us, inciting that the Jews are equally at fault, and there is more so-called Palestinians dead than the Jews in the attack. That may be true, but so too there was a lot more Germans dead than the number of, let's say, Americans or British who were dead. Unfortunately, that's the result of war. If Hamas will give up the fight, then, right, there is even, in fact, Israel is throwing them letters that if they come out, if they want to, just like the Russians did and the Americans, of course, during the World War II, those Germans who want to stop fighting and come out, they won't be killed. They'll be taken to prison, and then each one will be judged according to what exactly they did. Those, of course, who killed many Jews, Israel is not going to release them, but they're not going to kill them. They'll sit in Israeli jail, which is, by the way, quite a comfortable place. In many ways, it's much better than American jails. It's more similar to European, Western European type of jails. But by the way, the main orchestrator of this last attack, he was sitting in Israeli jail. And he was actually, the Israelis did an operation on his brain to save him. Because, of course, the prisoners have rights, right? So they did a very complex operation. If somebody in Russia, let's say, had a similar sickness, he'd probably sell his house, his car, or his friends would pitch in, and then he would go to Israel to have this operation. It's not done in every country. It's a very complex operation. But for a Hamas chief, they did this operation. They saved his life. And then later he was exchanged for Gilad Shalit among more than 1,000 terrorists who were exchanged for Gilad Shalit. And now he orchestrated an attack that killed over 1,000 Israelis in the worst barbaric ways. So that's our situation. Ani shalom ki adaber hemel milchama. I want peace. I'm all in peace. I'm all peace. That's the majority of Israelis. There are different exclusions. Again, this is another work of media to take the exclusions and bring them as if it's mainstream. Yeah, there are always exclusions, but the majority of Israeli society wants peace. Vast majority. And that's why it constantly voted when there was a possibility of peace, when they were hoping for peace. It voted for the people who would hopefully make some kind of peace. The problem is that just one last thing that I want to mention. This is a specific example of a lie that happened a long time ago in the New York Times when they published Abbas's article. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of Fatah fraction of, he's the one who is ruling the so-called Palestinian autonomy on the West Bank. They, of course, don't have a full country, but he basically rules in civilian ways over 98% of the so-called Palestinians, right? The Arabs who started calling themselves Palestinians in the last couple of generations. So Mahmoud Abbas wrote an article in New York Times where he claims that when UN voted for the partition plan, where there will be a small Jewish state and a relatively big Arab state, that was the original idea in 47, that the Arabs accepted it and the Jews did not accept it. So this is exactly the opposite of the truth, and it's very well documented and easily verifiable. It's as easy as saying that, for instance, World War II ended, at least between with Germany around 8th or 9th of May. There are different ways to celebrate, right? In Russia they celebrate the 9th of May, in the Western Europe the 9th of May, but that it ended around that time, but Japan had continued somewhat longer. All these are facts, or that the Allies opened Second Front on the D-Day in the 44th, in 1944, in Normandy. So the former ambassador of Israel to America, his name is Michael Oren. He's a very liberal Jew, leftist Jew, who obviously believes in two-state solution, and he was under Obama, the ambassador from Israel to America. Of course, they usually choose an ambassador who is at least not going to antagonize the country to which he sends. So he's a former American Jew. He's very liberal. He generally loves Obama and thinks he's very smart and has a lot of good things to say about him. So this man, Michael Oren, he wrote a very important book about the Six-Day War with a lot of approbations from important, including important leftist outlets with a lot of historical research. And among other things, he writes there in that book that he calls the New York Times, I think, chief editor, somebody who's in charge there. He says, Andy, don't you check facts at all? Is it a question of, do you just make up things? How could you write such a thing? How could an article like that get published in such a newspaper as New York Times? And he says then, was the D-Day on such and such? I don't remember the exact day, but he's a historian. He knows all this. It was the D-Day when America opened Second Front in America with others in Normandy on such and such day. And the Sandy answers, well, it's an opinion, meaning anybody can have opinions. So Abbas can have his opinion. By the way, his dissertation, he was at some point learning in the Soviet Union, which was very anti-Israel at that time. And his dissertation was basically a Holocaust denial of sorts. So this man has his own lunatic vision, which either he himself believes in these lies, or what's more likely is he knows it's a lie, but he still promotes it. He writes an article, New York Times publishes it without checking the facts at all, easily verifiable facts. So the Jews supposedly did not accept the solution, and the Arabs did accept the two-state solution. It wasn't the Arabs who attacked the Jews, what led to, of course, in the 48, the division, which was already different from, right? Once the Arabs didn't accept the partition plan, the Jews did get larger territories than originally was allocated to them. And everybody understood that there's no other way. There was some kind of buffer zone that was needed. And later, when the Arabs again wanted to destroy all Jews and didn't hide it, and openly said it, then in Six-Day War, Israel got again territories, even bigger territories. Where is the fairness in general? There were Jews, for instance, living in Eastern Yerushalayim, in the main part, of course, near our Kotel, right, the western wall of the temple, of the mount, and in general in the Jewish quarter, they lived there for generations, for centuries. And then when these territories were conquered by Jordan, every single Jew was expelled who wasn't killed. Everybody was expelled. And it was normal. They didn't leave a single Jew. They didn't even allow Jews to travel there, to come to the Kotel. They allowed the Christians, but they did not allow the Jews to come there. And then, when the Jews, of course, remained in the territory where they remained, the Arabs in large number remained. And again, the Jews from Arab countries were expelled by and large. In most of the Arab countries, hundreds of thousands of Jews were expelled. And yet the world doesn't talk about any of this. They talk about the so-called Palestinian refugees. But what about the Jewish refugees? So if, for instance, like Abbas and the Palestinian autonomy wants, the Jews would give up all the territories to prior to 67, to the Six-Day War borders. So again, not a single Jew will be living in the places where ancestors lived for generations. So we don't have a right to live on the territory of the supposed Palestinian state, but the so-called Palestinians are going to live. There's, of course, close to 2 million already. I mean, it's growing all the time, the number of Arabs in Israel. Plus, they want all the so-called refugees to be able to come to Israel. Where is the fairness? Where is the world that they're listening to Abbas's lunatic proposals? The Jews wouldn't have access to the Kotel. There would be a way for any terrorist to shoot right near the Jews who live in a million, right? We're talking about Jerusalem. Let's say the border will not be like with Gaza, with a few small settlements that are nearby, and they were able to kill over 1,000 people. Let's say the border goes right in the middle of Jerusalem, like they want. So the Jews would be killed every day in hundreds. Whenever the terrorists would want to attack the Jews, especially, there's also a mountain range all over the eastern part. Anything east of the division line would be a lot easier to shoot airplanes, to shoot at people, to throw bombs. If from Gaza they were able to do such damage, can you imagine what would be done if they would have a country with borders going right through Jerusalem? Right through Jerusalem? It's simply impossible. The Jews want peace, but they don't want to commit suicide. That's for sure not. The peace can only be achieved if we would have peace-loving neighbors next to us. Then of course it would be possible to have peace. But for that you have to have a generation where the vast majority of so-called Palestinian Arabs would love the Jews and want to live in peace with them. Only then it's possible to achieve peace. Not in a situation now. And by the way, Abbas hasn't been running elections for many, many years. So if he runs elections now, it was very easy determinable that Hamas would win. So would have the same thing as in Gaza, would have on a much larger territory from which it would be a lot easier to attack the Jews. That's why Israel doesn't give up their hold to that land. Not because they absolutely don't want peace and wouldn't give up the land for peace. Israel already has been giving up land for peace. This formula, land for peace, existed, and Israel tried it a number of times. Gave up all the territories to Egypt. Now the peace with Egypt is very fragile. All this huge area in Sinai was like 80% of Israel, with all the things that existed there. It was all given to Egypt for peace. But with Egypt, at least it was possible to make sort of peace. By the way, when Morsi came to power, this peace was in danger of totally collapsing. But thankfully, soon enough, they had another revolution, and al-Sisi came to power, and there's some kind of a Cold War, but you can't really call it peace, but it's a very fragile peace with Egypt. And with Jordan also, they have a peace treaty, but the Jordan doesn't allow Jews to buy real estate there. Anybody who sells land to the Jews, I think it's death penalty. That's the situation that Israel is facing. And the world is also against us. You'd think that at least the world, at least the various newspapers that have liberal values, would agree that Israel is the only place there where there's values of people kept, where Israeli Arabs have full citizenship. But unfortunately, Israel is portrayed as a villain, and that's what we have to fight against. By the way, I recently wrote an email to the former the Nobel Prize winner, Israel Ullman, Robert Ullman. He was a professor in Hebrew University. I'm not sure he still teaches, but he's a very smart individual. There are lectures of him on YouTube on economics, in the Talmud, and various other things. And I wrote to him an email, what can be done about the newspapers and others who constantly portray Israel in such lying ways? What can we do about Lashon Remiyah? What can we do to save ourselves from their lying tongue? Can anything be done? And he thinks there's not really much we could do. There are already organizations that are trying to show all the lies of the media, but who will look at their sites, of course, and their social media platforms are far less used, far less found in the searches than the ones who hate us. And on this I'm gonna end. And if you like this video, please press like.